well, this is terrible, you shouldn't have done that, I told you not to do it 4 years ago, and they never said any such thing. Another area I'll comment on is high LTV rules. These rules have been around for decades, but we didn't follow them. We didn't know they existed, or at least I didn't. My loan review guy tells me he did, but we weren't following it. No banks were following it to the best of my knowledge. And got a friendly call, I think, in 2008 saying, well, you know about such and such a part of 329 of the federal regs where you're supposed to be tracking high LTV rules, and I played along with her in this friendly conversation and said, oh yeah, sure, of course, you're right. But there's loan-to-value limits that you're supposed to be following that everybody was ignoring. And you have limits as to how many loans you can have in this category, and so that's been a bit of a damper. If you're lending on raw farmland for development, the loan-to-value is supposed to be 65%. Well, historically, prior to that time period, we'd be lending up to 80, for example. You know, and we just closed a loan, I think, in the high 60s, so that was a high LTV loan, you know, a month or two before I got that call. Subdivisions are supposed to be 75%. Well, again, if we were lending at 80%, that's a high LTV loan again from that side. You know, some of the other things were ignored by the regulators, and they're focusing on them now, but to place blame where it belongs, we should have been doing that as a banking industry. We weren't paying close enough attention to global cash flow. It's hard to do. I think we were good as an industry for manufacturing companies, but it was a lot easier for a manufacturer to do global cash flow analysis than for a developer. And the better businesses we dealt with were able to start producing global cash flow information. The weaker ones were not. But even the sharp people that could produce it for you, oftentimes the results weren't good. So we're paying close attention to global cash flow. That's being pushed by the examiners. But even if it wasn't being pushed by the examiners, bankers should do it. So those are my observations on the business-to-business side. I have a lot more to say on the end user side, and maybe I shouldn't get too deep into it, but Dodd-Frank is a disaster. Fannie Mae is a disaster. They are very, very tight. People blame us all the time when we turn them down, and it's Fannie Mae turning them down, and they don't understand that difference. You know, we'll offer them an arm or a balloon, something that we can keep on our books. They don't want an arm or a balloon. They want a 30-year fix through Fannie Mae, for example, and then we get blamed on that. Foreclosures are taking longer, not due to any law changes, but subtle things, such as how fast can we schedule a confirmation hearing after the sheriff's sale, things like that. And next year, in January of 2014, I don't have my arms all the way around what's in Dodd-Frank and what will take effect next year, and I know there's a bunch of bankers in the room, so you might know more on this. But just nasty, nasty stuff coming down the pipe. We're not going to be able to use stated income anymore. And stated income was given a bad name with respect to the so-called liar's loans. We do a ton of stated income, and we've never gotten burned on it, but we eat our own cooking. And so, you know, if you're talking to somebody and they tell you, I make so much money, well, you make a judgment. Your underwriter makes a judgment. Do we trust him? Sure. Then we won't get a W-2, or we'll just get a W-2 but not do a full underwriting package. Well, we're not going to have that discretion anymore. So think of to use an extreme example, think of a self-employed individual who wants a $20,000 home equity loan to buy a car. January of next year, they're going to be giving us, presumably under Dodd-Frank, 2 years business tax returns, 2 years personal tax returns, and an interim financial statement on their business to buy a car for $20,000. That's Dodd-Frank. So I think you're going to be for a shock as to how nasty it is, and we'll get blamed for that, but it's not our fault. The appraisal rules are very, very stupid. Again, we eat most of our own cooking, and so why can we no longer pick our own appraiser? I get why you don't want us picking the appraiser for a loan you're selling to Fannie Mae, because Fannie Mae would buy anything a few years ago, and then the taxpayer's on the hook for it. But we're being told we can't pick our own appraisals anymore when we order a loan. Now, as a small bank, we have a little bit more flexibility than the large banks, but that's the impact of the rules. And then you get an appraisal back from an appraiser that you don't necessarily think was competent to do the appraisal. The appraisers don't want to talk to us anymore. If they goof up, it's hard to get them to raise an appraised value or lower an appraised value for that matter. We did have some success recently on a purchase where the appraiser screwed up and we got the number moved up $15,000 and saved the closing, but it was ugly. It would have been a lot easier 1 or 2 years ago. Other things coming into effect next year, you've got the 43% DTI. Balloons, as I understand them, are going to be verboten. Right now, balloons are still allowed as long as it's not an HPML or an OEPA loan. In other words, as long as it's a very strong borrower. Trying to think of a couple other things. Starting January next year, it'll be a 120-day minimum before you can start a foreclosure on a 1 to 4 family. So is that going to make banks more aggressive in their lending to marginal borrowers or less aggressive? So that's my start. And that was only the first question, I think, John. Should we go to the rest of the panel and circle back? Or how do you
actually, that might not be a bad idea. From a developing perspective, since bank financing is going to be such a challenge for us in the future, what are the ways that, are you guys looking to finance as an investor? How are you guys handling that?
Haven't had to figure it out yet. No, for us anyway, fortunately we've remained in very good relations with our banks through this process, and we've changed from updating them once a year. Basically, you send them your tax returns and you go meet with them, tell them what you did and what you plan to do. We now do semi-annual meetings with them. We bring them all in at one time. This goes to the global cash flow discussion because we use multiple different banks, and so instead of me going to meet with one bank and say, well, this particular entity or this particular development that you have financed, here's how it's doing, good or bad, and then what about the other 10 or 12 different things we have going on. So what we did is we just brought them all in, and then we do it twice a year. We do it in January, we do it in July. We let them know where we're at according to what we told them we were going to do, where we plan to go, where we think we're going, and that way there's not this big shock once a year like, oh geez, I missed my number by 10%, or I'm doing better. If you're doing better, of course you want to let them know like the next day. But you know, the reality is for us, it was just a matter of making sure those lines of communication are open, being more transparent than we ever have been, and then bringing them all in at one time so that they all know everything that we happen to be doing. If you work with one bank, I just encourage you to talk to them a lot. If you work with multiple banks, banks like to be in the room together. Granted, they compete with each other, but at the end of the day, some banks will think of asking questions that other banks may not, and oftentimes they learn from each other. We found that to be a really productive thing for us, at least, to sit everyone around a table. Anyone can ask whatever question they want, and that helped us a lot through this whole process. We started doing that about 4 years ago, and so as we get back into entitlement, we had our annual meeting this year, we told them, you know, we're going to have to get back into entitlements again, which means we've got to borrow more money because we actually have to have letters of credit and we have to build these roads. And without building roads, we can't continue the rest of the operation of what we do. And so they know about it well in advance, and then probably in the next, 3, 4, 5 months, I'll come back to them with an actual request to do that. So I think just projecting out what you need to do and communicating with your banks would be the #1 piece of advice I'd give everyone.
My viewpoint on the whole bank is that clearly banks are going to have to be back in this business, or there won't be stuff built. I mean, there could be stuff built all cash, but the reality is you're going to have that. The things you have to overcome from a banking perspective is there was a lot of pain in the cycle for the developers, there's pain in the cycle for the builders, pain in the cycle for the banks. And so how do you get over that whole fear and conquer that fear and forge ahead? And I think that'll happen. I've talked to a lot of bankers in town. We have multiple. We probably have, 10, 12 different banking relationships here in town. And I'd say, there's some that they're just not there yet. Don't talk to me about land. There's a couple that are saying, hey, we're back in business. Our balance sheet's healthy now. We're ready to lend again in this space. We've gotten our inventory down on land, and we're in a position to lend in that space. So I think you'll see banks come back into it. Again, it's a brave new world. It's kind of like moving back to the future. You're going to be back in time. You're going to see very conservative lending standards. 65% sounds high to me on land.
I was going to give them an application.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm saying that. The truth is that, from my own personal perspective, as a guy that had to sign on debt, to get some stuff done, do I want to do that? I mean, there were some painful moments, and from a big picture perspective, we grinded our way through that. We did it, but I mean, from my perspective, what we're looking at, our viewpoint is probably max 50% debt, and maybe you guys like to hear that. That's how we're looking at it. I wouldn't want to borrow more than 50%. And and our viewpoint is to really more collaborative approach. We look to bring investors to the table. We're really good about bringing investors. That's one thing that we're really good at, is the ability to bring investment capital to the table, organize that investment capital, but then also partner with the builders. We really feel that to be productive, you're gonna have to, now, we don't have a billing operation, so we're a little different from that perspective, but I see partnerships, I see, you know, we do a subdivision, maybe half the lots are on the front end, on the front side are wholesaled out to the builders. They participate in the upfront capitalization, and the deal goes forward. And maybe the builder gets a wholesale price on the stuff they buy. We make a little margin for organizing it and developing all that kind of good stuff, and the project goes forward, and also has some investors involved. I think you're going to have that kind of creative flow to really get stuff done, because we got to walk again. You know, we're all running pretty hard, pretty fast, and look at those numbers. You know, everybody's rocking pretty good, and now there's some damage from this cycle, and I think you have to overcome that. You have to walk before you run, and deals will get put together. It'll be creative. It'll be a mix of equity, a mix of partnerships. You know, maybe two developers partnering with some builders. I mean, I think you're going to see creativity in the market. I think that's how you're going to see it recover, you know, overall. And I think the banks will like that message in general. You know, when you come to the table again and ask them. But I think the banks will be there. They're in business too, and they know that no building's getting. Ultimately, if there's no new lots, at some point you run out of lots with no new homes built, and that's not very good for our economy. It's not very good for our community. So we need, as a community, to really support the building industry, and as bankers, I would think they'd want to see that happen, you know, overall. So I'm encouraged. I think it's going to all come back, but it's just going to be a little walk before you run.
Well, Ty's probably not going to want to hear this, but I think we're going to see many more developers going to equity partners in their contractors, especially to make things happen. Having contractors contribute their work to the project is the easiest, simplest way to do things if the developer owns the property. And so we still have to have the bank, we still need letters of credit, we still need guarantees, financial guarantees for the community, so that won't go away. You'll still have all that. But I think that's the way that we're going. Either contractor partners or other partners that just show up with money and want to invest in something. That's where we see it right now. We don't have a lot of projects. We don't have a large number of projects. And I think you're going to see also that you probably will not see 100-lot subdivisions going in anytime real soon. You're probably going to see 25, 30 lots at a time. And some might sell out very quickly, some might sell very slowly. I don't think it's time to run out there and start buying lots yet, or buying land yet. Land is still, we're seeing raw land with sewer. I think most of you have seen it, between 10 and 15,000 an acre. It's on par with what ag users are buying it for, and that's something that is striking when you consider we paid $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 an acre for some of this land less than 10 years ago, and makes you want to choke. Even higher amounts for those that get higher yields and densities. So we haven't seen the lot prices go up yet. That's something that's going to start driving up as inventories get lower, and at that point then we're going to start really thinking about who the equity partners are going to be, because at that point we're really going to need to get some steam in the engine and get it rolling down the tracks with new developments.
Great answers again, you guys. If I can drift off a little bit, are there other drivers or impacts that you're concerned about that's going to impact your prospect of land development? You know, whether that be land cost, municipal challenges, what drivers do you guys see?
I think the #1 issue right now, besides financing, is municipal hoops. We've all been jumping through them for a long time, and if these communities want development, they're going to have to lower their standards to some extent. I know Jim with Homes by Town is doing something here in the city of Pewaukee, and they have some pretty high standards. There's some massive impact fees. There's some communities here in western Waukesha County that are going to be charging anywhere between $20,000 and $35,000 per lot just to hook up to their sewer. That's just not going to be viable for anybody. At this point, they've got to drop those charges or somehow figure out a way to make it up in another spot, because that will just make a potential project go right out the door. It's just not going to happen.
I'll
piggyback on that, but we've actually approached like Workers Milky and suggested they do a lot of work for the communities and really talk about the concept of having impact fees be paid on a permit by the customer rather than upfront. Because if we have to pay a $9,000 permit up front, that means the lot price is probably gonna have to go up about maybe from $9,000 to $15,000 because you have all the carrying costs. We gotta pay investors, we gotta pay the banks. So that upfront $9,000 has a $15,000 impact to the customer, not just a $9,000 impact. And getting that, talk about creativity, you know, moving the impact fee to the time of permit versus being paid up front, I think would be another important adjustment to look to, as well as just lowering overall, you know, amount to make the numbers work. I mean, I think the biggest hurdle that exists out there is the development model is fundamentally broken right now in concept. If you look at the retail price of lots versus the cost of producing lots, they're out of balance. And you need a certain amount of spread in retail price because when you develop something, you got all the carry and the carrying costs of land. You got to pay returns to investors. You know, you got the risk factor. So there's got to be a decent enough spread to take that business risk. You know, so from that perspective, it impacts overall. So there needs to be improvement in land prices and lot prices ultimately that customers are willing to pay. Otherwise, you can't make the math work. So that takes some time to happen. And I really